This week, last week, we've been building on our script every week that we started the mod script where we've been doing QB target stuff, and then last week we set it up where you could repo vehicles, and we put in then we put in a hostile ped that would attack you whenever you tried to steal the vehicle. And so I was trying to figure out how to build off of that lesson, and I decided to build it so that we could put in a experience system so that as you build your reputation with mod, you could level up and do other things. So I was planning to make it so you level up and then you can do a hitman job and go ahead and program the hitman job also, but I decided that would be too much, and since we're going to talk about SQL, there's going to be some new stuff. So we're just going to set up the SQL experience tracking this week. And then whenever we do the next class, probably Wednesday, a week from Wednesday, we'll do the Hitman mission. So for tonight, it's just going to be the SQL stuff. So we're going to have to first make a modification to our FX manifest. There is a script, oxmysql, that you need to use. You need the library from oxmysql in order to run SQL syntax in your scripts, and you need SQL in order to write and read from the database. So the only thing we're going to modify in our FX manifest is just we're going to add at the top of the server scripts the oxmysql library. All SQL language, all SQL queries that you're going to do is going to be done in the server side of your script. You cannot do SQL. You can't execute SQL statements on the client side. It's not possible. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up our database. And so I've already set up a database here. I'm just going to leave it. It's fine. I called the database dev training, and I don't know if I want to delete it and do it again, but I guess I need to show you guys how to do it. If you don't know, I'm just going to walk you through the steps. So the first thing I did, and I'll make another one and just call it example. So you do you right click on this side of the screen and you pick create new table, and then you give it a table name, and then you put a comment, and then you add all the columns that you want to be in your table. So we're gonna cancel that. I'm not gonna do that actually. Let's see, refresh. I should have got rid of it. Okay, so the one that I created is called dev training. So I did exactly what I just showed you. I right clicked and I made a table called dev training. I put in a comment that it's for the dev training lessons, and I put in 3 columns. So I have an index, which is an integer, and it's auto increment. You want to have that. That's your primary key. That's what this little key symbol means. The way you assign a primary key is you right click on the row and you pick create new index and you pick primary. And then I want the player's account number, which in old QB Core, before all the modifications that they've done recently, you would use Citizen ID, but apparently Citizen ID isn't a thing anymore. And I just found that out today whenever I was writing this up for the lesson. It's now called account. So if you go to the player table in your database, players, and you look at the data in there, and you look at character info, it's registered by their license, but that's their FiveM license. So you can see I have 2 players in my server, and they have the same exact license. So that's not a unique identifier. So if you use license, oh wait, there's Citizen ID. I don't know. Well, anyway, what I did is I didn't use Citizen ID, so ignore everything I said. Apparently that's still a thing, but I've already set this up. So if you look in the player character info and you copy that, My apologies. I totally overlooked citizen ID earlier today. Um, Let me just delete all this. So I copied my player data and paste this, and I've got an account, and it's USO8QB Core 3124550150. That account number is different for every character. I verified that earlier. And so that is the variable that I'm using as my identifier for my database. So you could use citizen ID, but we're not doing that. We're just going to use this account as our unique identifier for the table tracking. So let's go back to dev training. And again, I set this all up in tables. So I created a table, named it index integer auto increment. That's what you always want to have a primary key that's an auto incremented index. And then for my secondary key, because I don't want to have more than one entries with the same account number. So if you set it up as a key, it won't add a second one. If there's some mistake in the script and it tries to add a second one, it'll just fault out and give you an error message that it already exists. All we want to do is we want to add to, as they gain experience, we want to add to it. And I made it variable character because as you saw when I just showed that other screen, it was like QB Core USO or some stuff. So there's both there's both characters and integers or numbers in the string, and so that's called a variable of varchar or variable character. I set it the length to 50. I'm setting its default as blank just because you have to have a default if it's a key, and this is not a primary key. This is just a key, so it means it's unique, but it's not a primary identifier. And I set it as blank, and then I made the column where we're going to actually track the experience. It's called mod XP, mod underscore XP. I made it an integer, so it's only going to have whole numbers in it. It can have up to a length of 11. It's not auto incremented. I made the default just 0. So I added all these columns by clicking this add button and just typing this stuff in. So that's how you that's how you can manually create a SQL database. Then if you go over to data, you'll see I have index, which is a primary key. I have account, which is a secondary key. And then I have mod XP. And I have 2 players that I've already tested this with. And so they are already entered in here. That's the 2 players. You can see they have unique identifiers with that account number. So it'll keep them separate so that if you log in with a different character, if you use a FiveM license, all the characters will have the same license number, and so people would have XP across multiple characters, and that's not really what you want. Each character should have their own XP tracking. So anyway, that's how you set up the database. And then if you're, let's go ahead and delete these. I'll go ahead and delete these because these will repopulate once we get started. Once we get finished with writing our script. So once you have a database and you're happy with it, and that's how you want it, it's a good idea to make it an SQL for your that you can attach inside your script as an SQL. If you've downloaded any scripts online, they'll usually have an SQL file in them that you run to load your database. So the way you create one, if you don't know how to do that, you right click on the table and you pick export database as SQL. And that's not you can select all the tables that you want to extract, but I just want to take dev training. And I don't want to create a database because we've already got a database, and we don't want it to be specific. So if I click create database, it's going to require that whoever uses this script has the same database name that I have, but they may have a different data. My database is called IRP2. They could have their own database name. If you click this top button, it'll require that it'll create a database for them called IRP2. So you want to leave that one blank so that it's a generic table that'll go into any database. For data, you can either choose to add no data, replace existing data, or whatever. In this case, we just want no data. They don't need any data entered from the table. Our table is currently empty, so it doesn't make any difference. But if you're doing a database that has built-in stuff that you're going to be using for your script, For example, if you're talking about if you make like a business script and you have some standard business stuff that's going to be required for them, then you would pick replace existing data or insert if you have specific things that need to be loaded. For us, this is just a blank database that'll update as the players log in. I'm going to output it as a single SQL file, and then you have to pick a place where you want it to go. And for us, I want it to go to, excuse me, I want it to go to our script that we're writing. So I'm going to go find KSUI custom scripts, dev training. That's where I want it to go. And I'm going to save that. Oh, and I need to put the name here. So I want this to not Mark Leveling. I want it to be called mod XP is what we'll call it. Save, and then you just click export, and it says it's already finished. So we're all done with that. So our database is set up, and we have downloaded the file so that a new player can find it. You'll see it's now here in my Visual Studio Code. There's some things you can do here. So here's all you really need is this create table if not exists. We don't need all this comment shit, so we'll just delete all that. And we don't need this. We'll just delete that. This is all they need is this create table if not exists. So we'll just delete all this other comment stuff. And there you go. So if you ever need to reload your database or something happens to your database, you just run this SQL in your Heidi and you'll have your database back. It's going to have your index, your account, your mod XP. It's setting those up as auto increment, default blank, and then it's setting the primary key as index, and it's setting the license key as account. So there you go. Our database is all set up, and so we're ready to start. We're ready to start writing our script. All right. So for this week, we're going to start in the config as always. I have a few things I want to add to the config. Let me grab them real quick. Since I'm working solo, I'm having to watch and make sure my mic's still on and everything. But all right, so here's what we're going to add for lesson 4. I'm going to go ahead and populate this config for future things that we're going to do in future classes. So this is the XP rewards that we're going to pay out whenever someone completes a mission for mod. So the mission that we have right now is repo. Oh, fuck. My power just flashed. Everybody can see the screen again. We're good to go. We're back on it. Okay, thanks guys. All right, so the plan is we're going to reward XP for different missions. So the first mission is repo. Every time they complete a repo mission, we're going to give them 1 XP. Then the next class we do, we're going to create a hitman job. We're going to get 5 XP for that. The next class after that, we'll set up some sort of drug deal job. We'll do a robbery and a heist. This is like the next few weeks of programming that we're going to do, or coding. The heist will probably take a couple of weeks. Robbery should be 1 class. Depends on what we decide to rob, if it's a bank or whatever. But anyway, you get a kind of a preview of the next classes that we're going to do. That's all we need for our XP. That's all we need for that. We're going to need to make a few changes to our client Lua. And I think I've already made the edits, and I think I just marked where they were added on. I think I had to change something here. What did I change? Yeah, here we go. Lesson 4 add-on. So basically, whenever this is just inside of our deliver vehicle function. So that's where we're going to want to add XP at. And so we're just going to trigger this event called KSUI Dev Training Client Add XP. So any mission that you have, whenever you do your payout and the mission's complete and you want to add XP, we're going to write a standard function that we can add XP through. And this right here, instead of doing a loop like we've done in the past on the configs, this is for the deliver vehicle. So this is for the repo job. So we're identifying the variable as config.xp rewards brackets repo, and that matches with our config.xp rewards bracket repo. So the value that will get returned here is going to be 1, and we'll pass it along. And that's the only thing we need to add to the previous scripts that we've written is this one trigger, and that's going to be where we actually add the XP. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, since we're working in SQL, is we're going to have to work in our server, and let me just delete all this, and that way it's not confusing. I'll write it all in. Okay, so we'll go step by step here. So the first thing that you want to do always is add your QB Core exports at the top, because we're going to be using some QB Core functions. Okay, and step 1 is going to be server client. Okay, yes. All right, so the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a callback. And the callback is going to be so we can find out how much experience the player has whenever they whenever you're wanting to check and see if they can complete a mission or not, you're going to want to find if they have any XP or not. So we're going to create a callback to do that. The way you create a callback is with this function. It's called qbcore.functions.create callback, and we're going to call it ksui dev training server get XP table. And we're going to have it's going to have a source and CB. And for the QB core function, usually you don't have to put source when you're on the server side, but for the callbacks you do. The first variable that it gets is going to be source. That's going to be your magic number, right? Your client identifier. And CB is going to be the callback that we send back to where we trigger this from. And we're going to put a debug here just to make sure that we're triggering this for troubleshooting later. Like once we're done with our program, we want to make sure that it's working. So we're going to have a callback or a debug that's just going to notify us that we triggered that callback. We're going to go ahead and do our standard practice of converting source to SRC. It's not necessary. You could just make this SRC instead of source, and then you can just reference it as SRC in here. It's just good practice to always do it the same so that you don't forget. All right, and then we have to get the player's account that we're going to be referencing in the database table, this account number. And the way that you get that is through another QB core function, and it's get player source. So we've done this in one of the previous lessons. I'm not going to repeat it. You remember we did qbcore.functions get player, and then we debugged that, and we saw that that showed everything about the player, and it showed all their inventory and everything else. So their account number is inside their player data, and then inside their character info, and then that value is returned in .account. So this is basically a review. We've done this before. If you don't remember, you can go back and watch. I think it was lesson 1, maybe lesson 2, where we evaluated what this looks like in a debug print, where we saw all the data. So we're not going to do that again, but we've been talking about configs a lot, and so that's how you get to the variable you're looking for. You just add those headers for the rows. We're going to want to create a table called local XPS equals just you do an open and curly bracket to notify the script that we're looking for a table, but we don't have any data for the table yet, so it's a blank. And then we're going to get a table to evaluate by querying the database, and so this is our database query. So this is going to create a table XP-SQL that we're going to evaluate with a loop. And mysql.sync.fetchAll means there's two different types of MySQL statements. There's sync and there's async. If you do an async statement, it will run at the same time as other things are happening. So if you do a .async, and then you're just returning a single table like this, we're returning everything from the dev training table. If you do async, before this happens, it will continue through the script. So if you did an async, then you have to put a function and a bracket behind it, and you have to do everything inside of that. We'll do that probably in a later lesson and show you why that's important. But anytime you're wanting to just return a table and evaluate it, you use sync, and that happens instantly. So the script will not progress until this table is returned, until this value is populated. So it'll run a query of the database, and everything will be paused until the query comes back and we have a value. But if you copy someone else's SQL statement that says async, this what we're about to do wouldn't work, because it would be running that query and it would already have proceeded through the script. And that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. It'll make sense later whenever we do an async function for an example. But for today, just trust me. If you're wanting to get a result and evaluate that result, you just want to use sync. Okay, and so this is the SQL statement to return all the values from the dev training table. SQL statements are written inside of quotes because it's basically sending your command over to the database and executing an SQL statement in the database. And so select star means select everything that's in dev training. All right. And we could do a QB core debug there if we wanted to, but we're not. But one thing I like to do, even though I'm doing a sync, it's going to take a little bit of time for that to return. And I don't want the program to try to advance until it's done. And so I'm just putting in 100 millisecond wait so that it has time to catch the data, get this table fully loaded, and then proceed. So this is like 1/10 of a second. This is a very small table. If you had a really big table, you might want to put in a longer wait. You don't necessarily have to do this, but if somebody has a real potato computer, it's probably a good idea, because this may not have fully populated if it's a big table before it proceeds. So anyway, we're going to slap a little wait in there. Waits never hurt you. They're always fine. We're going to add a couple of debugs just so we can make sure we're getting our table back. This first debug, obviously we have quotes around it, so that's just going to print to our debug screen. Is going to print XPSQL, and that's just going to tell us that the next data that we see in our debug is our table that we recovered from our database fetch. And this will just be for us to evaluate that everything's working. When you're done writing your script, you can delete all the debugs. We're just putting them in place before we get started so that it's good troubleshooting practice. Okay, and then we're going to create another variable called license found equals false, because what we're doing is there's only going to be one entry in this database for each player's license, and so we want to verify if they have a record in the database or not. And so we're going to create a variable that we can populate if we find a license in the database. All right, and then we're going to do our loop evaluation of the table. I'm just going to paste it and then I'll step through it. So XPSQL, this first statement is just making sure that there's data in the database. At this time, there is not, right? Because we just deleted all the data out of the database. So this is only going to run if there's data in the database. So what this is saying is if the table isn't nil, and next means and there's another record, so that it's not like sometimes it'll have a blank column, and so this isn't nil, but it's basically 0, and the next is empty. Anyway, you put this in just to make sure it's not a blank column. You have to have the and next, or this will process, and then you'll get an error message because there is no data in the XPSQL if it's an empty table, which it is currently. But if it has information in it, then you're going to do a loop, an in pairs loop of the XPSQL table, and you're going to check if the v.account, which is the XPSQL.account, is what it would be, equals the player's account. So if there's a record in the database that matches the player's account, then you're going to set your XPS table is going to be equal to the result that you got from the database at the index K. So basically that's going to return your player's data. So that means they already have a record in the database, and it's going to return what their record says in the database. We're going to change license found equals true for the next step that we're going to do below, and then you just break, because you don't need to process this table any further once you've found the record, because there's only one record in there. If you don't put the break, it'll continue processing all the information in the table, and unnecessarily, because there won't be another record that matches, because it's a unique record for that account. So, and so you just break out of there with that. All right, so then after the database has been processed, we're going to say if not license found, because we set license found to true if there was a record. So if not license found means that there was no record. So if there is no record, then we have to create a record in the database. And the way you do that is with mysql.async execute. And that's going to insert into the dev training in the column account and mod XP. You do this values and you put at account, and this should be at mod XP. So this is telling it. This is telling the this SQL statement is saying to insert into the dev training table in the columns account and mod XP the values of at account and at mod XP, and then you end that and you close it, and then you have a curly bracket. And so here is where we define at account and at mod XP. And we're going to set account equal to the account that we identified for the player on line 6. And if it's, since it's the first entry in the database, it's going to be 0 XP, so you set that value to 0. And then we're going to make this table that we had originally set as blank, which would have been populated if there was a record. Since it's not populated yet, we're going to populate it now, and it's going to be account equals account and mod XP equals 0. And now we need to send this back, because remember, this is a callback function, and what we're trying to get is their experience table. And so the way you send that back is a little different. It's not CB equals, it's basically CB and then an open parenthesis, close parenthesis, and we're returning the XPS table. And again, if there was a record, the XPS table will be what was found in the database. If there's no record, it'll be a blank table that just identifies their account and their XP. And the reason we need to call this back is because, like I said, we're trying to grab their experience whenever we're evaluating if they're qualified to do a job or not. All right. So there's a couple of different ways to update the database. The way we're going to do it first is we're going to update the database every time they complete a mission. So one way that you can do it is you can just update information in a table on their client side, and then you actually don't post it to the database until they log out. And so then the database only gets updated once per play session. I'm going to show you how to do that, but it's not really, it doesn't make sense for this particular lesson, because what would happen is if they completed their missions and they had gotten enough XP while they were doing the missions, while they were in game, the database is still going to show their original experience. So you would have to reference the table that you've created in game to evaluate, instead of doing a callback from the database table. Anyway, I'll show you how to do both ways. The first way we're going to do it is we're going to check the database every time, and we're going to update the database every time they complete a task. So this is our server add XP function that we had added in our initially at the beginning of the lesson. We added it to our client Lua. So this is going to be the actual function. So let's go ahead and put our end in to get rid of the errors. So source is going to equal source. We need to have their account again. So again, it's just the local account equals their get player character info account. We're going to have an empty table here. Again, XPS table. We're going to fetch the data. It's basically the same stuff that we did up here. We're going to create a new variable called local account found equals false, and we're going to do the same thing that we did before. We're going to check the table to see if there's a record. And if there is a record, we're going to make this XPS table equal the XPSQL table. And we're going to break. This is the same stuff that we did up here. So if for whatever reason, they should have an account, because we're going to set it up so that on player loaded it populates. But if for whatever reason they don't have a record in the database, we're going to create the database. So basically everything that we did above, just repeating that to make sure that there's a record in the database if they don't have a record. But then we want to update that record. So what we're going to do is we're going to update the dev training, set mod XP to @XP, where account equals their account. So before we were inserting, so this function up here inserted into the database. So that meant there was absolutely no record. Same here. And so if there's no record, we insert it. But then the very next thing we're going to do, whether there was a record or not, it doesn't matter. We now have an XPS table that's either 0 or whatever was in the database. And we're going to set the XP, so xps.mod_XP plus XP add. And XP add we're sending over from our function. If you remember, whenever we put this in the client, let me flip over there real quick. So you remember we were sending the XP, which we got from the config. So 1 for repo. So this is going to be whatever the existing is. It's 0 if there was no record. It's whatever was in the database if there was a record. We're going to add 1 to it because the value that we're sending over here is 1 because it came from the config. Hopefully that's clear. All right, so that's what we need to do on the database side. So now we're going to create a lesson 4 client script. We're going to have an XP table over here. And we're going to populate that XP table whenever the player loads into the server. So we're going to add event handler on player loaded. We have a wait of 5,000 because as soon as they load into the server, before all of their character info is registered, this will happen. So if you don't put a wait here, this will happen immediately, and it'll be before all their character data has loaded. You know, sometimes when you load into the server, there's a little bit of a lag and everything as everything gets populated. So we put in a 5-second wait. So 5 seconds after they log in, we're going to get a message that says that we're fixing to trigger the callback for the table, and then we're going to execute our callback. And this is how we execute the callback that we just wrote at the top of the sheet. And so it's qbcore.functions.trigger callback. It's the name of the function that we wrote in the create callback. And this XP table, this is going to be the returned value. So this is the CB. This is the CB. This is the callback, which is going to be this callback, which is the XPS table. So that's what this is going to be. And so basically what's going to happen here is the callback is going to trigger, and it's going to wait for a response from the server. And once it gets a response, then it's going to populate the XP table for our client side with whatever the database values were. And then we're going to do a qbcore.debug XP just to make sure that we have a record for XP and it's not an empty table. So this table will either be directly from the database or it'll be the new record that we created. I'm going to skip that for now because that's if we do it once per session. All right, so we're going to add and register a net event for client @XP. And the reason we're doing this is because that's what we had in our client. This was a client This was triggering a client function. And so we're going to pass this over here because this is where we're doing all of our database work. And so this is just passing over that config value. And this is where we're going to actually trigger the server event that we just wrote here. Technically, you could trigger this from here. Instead of triggering the client side, you could trigger the server side from here, but I'm trying to keep the lessons separate. That's why I did it this way. So this is where we're just going to trigger this, and then we're going to trigger the server, and we're just going to pass this variable from that sheet to this sheet, and then to the server. So that's all that's happening there. This function is not necessary if you trigger the server directly from the last page, but like I said, we're just trying to keep all of our lessons segregated. All right, so we need another function to start the hit. This is what's going to happen if they have enough XP. They're going to be able to start the hit. We're going to put a debug to make sure that this function gets triggered. Start hit. We're going to set local current XP equals to 0. We're going to trigger our callback that we wrote here also. And this is because we're going to be updating every time they complete a mission. So the database is going to be where their current progress has been stored. And so this is basically the same thing that we did on player loaded. But what we're checking for here, because this is going to be when they try to execute the hit mission, we're going to do the check mod callback. It's going to give us the callback from the callback that we wrote in the server side. And then it's going to set our current XP variable to cb.modxp, and it's going to check if that current XP is greater than or equal to 10. If it is, then we'll start the Hitman mission that we're going to do next week. If it's not, it's going to tell them they don't have enough XP to start that job. And so there is one more thing that we have to add in the config. We're adding to mods options. I added a fourth option, which is for the Hitman contract. And so that's going to trigger that lesson 5 client start hit that we just put in. Lesson 5. Is this lesson 4 or 5? I think it's lesson 4, isn't it? Or is it 5? We're going to call it lesson 5. Anyway, so whenever they click on mod and try to do a hit, we're going to check their XP and see if they can do the hit or not. And if they can't, we're going to tell them that they need more XP to start the job. And believe it or not, that's all we have to do. So let's save all this, and we will launch our server. This is going to be kind of a short lesson tonight, and this is baseline SQL stuff, just to give an example of how to read and write from the database. Give that a second to fire up. We're gonna open up our localhost. Whoops. My mic just turned off and I turned it back on, so I'm glad I heard that little squeaky squeak. All right, live console. So the server's still booting up. We're doing our localhost, so we have our button here. So if I didn't miss anything, as soon as we log in, it's going to check the database and see that there's no records, and it's going to populate the database with our with a blank record for our character. Dongli. You can tell by the LFM face. I'm a little bit jealous of the Merc gang though, because they've been on vacation twice. How the fuck they afford these flights? I've been at the recycler. Oh boy, slow today. All right, so here we go. All right, Dong Li. He should be in Mod's office. All right, so it's going to take 5 seconds. So let's watch our deal. Okay, apparently it's already been 5 seconds before I got over here, but you can see that it triggered our callback for the table. It triggered the callback. XPSQL was populated with a nil. There was nothing there. And so then whenever it got to the bottom of that, it created a record. Mod XP is 0 and USO QB Core 4 is my account number. So if I go look at the database and I refresh it, there's our login. So that's our account number, and we have 0 XP right now. So if I just log out and I log back in, it's going to be a little different this time because it's going to have an index, because it's going to be pulling from the database this time. Okay, I was trying to get over to this. Okay, see this time, what is that? That is for a different script. Okay, so this was our first load in. So this time you can see that XPSQL was not blank. It had one record, and the record was mod XP account and index 4. And so now our XPS table is mod XP0, our account and index 4. So we still have 0 experience. So we want to check and make sure that we get experience if we run the mission. So we're going to sign a repossession contract with mod. We're going to go steal our car, which is all the stuff that we've done in the previous lessons. There's our bad guy over there. See if the door's unlocked. It is, so he's going to come try to pull me out of the car. It's pretty cool because if they're just searching for keys, you can't fight back until you're done searching for keys. So this guy's going to kick my ass because I can't do anything until I'm done searching. But now I'm done searching and I got the keys, luckily. All right. Okay, where is our drop off? And this is all the stuff that we've done in the previous lessons. So if this is the first one you've watched and you want to know how to do all this stuff, go watch the other lessons. So there's our come closer indicator. All right, and then we deliver the vehicle, and that gave us our $800, plus it should have updated the database. So if we look over here, there's our 800 payout. It just reset the car owner. All this stuff is from our previous debugs that we've done in previous lessons. So let's go check the database. I should have 1 XP when I refresh, And there you go, I've got 1 XP. So everything's working. The database is updating. If I log out now and log back in, it'll query the database, and you'll see that we have 1 XP on our debug. So it takes 5 seconds. There it is. So now mod XP is 1. So everything's working perfectly. So what I want to do next is log out and log in a different character. And now we're still going to have 1 record in the database, but we've got a different user ID because this was our first time that we got registered with the database. So now if I refresh the database, there's going to be 2 records. This is my first player and this is my second player. And he has 0 experience. If we ran the mission, he would have experience. I just want to, and if I log out and log out again, then that first printout is going to have 2 records in it now. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So 5 seconds. So see now before, this has always been just the first player that we registered because this is the XP SQL. So that's the table that's coming from the database. Well, now that table has 2 records, but it still is returning just 1 record for our in-game database that we're going to be using to add XP and stuff. So everything's working fine. That's exactly what we wanted to see. And then we also want to check and make sure we can't do the Hitman mission. So King Sui only has 1 record, and there's 2 mods because I'm running from the same client. So I've got 2 spawned because I didn't shut down FiveM. I just logged out and logged in, so that's why there's 2 mods there. But if I click sign Hitman contract, it says I need XP to start the job in the top right of my screen. So let me log this guy out. And we're going to cheat. Instead of doing 10 missions, I'm just going to go to Dong Li and give him XP of 12. And then if you update something here, you have to click this post check. And so that registers it. So if I click the refresh button, you can see it stayed at 12. So I'm going to log in with Dong Li. Watch my table here. It's going to say 12 this time for Dong Li instead of 1. So there you can see Dong Li has 12 XP. So this time, whenever I try to do the mission with mod with Dong Li, nothing's going to happen because I haven't wrote the function for the Hitman. But you'll know I won't get the message saying I don't have enough XP if everything's correct. So we take a look at mod, sign Hitman contract, and we didn't get the message, so it would have launched the Hitman contract whenever we write it. So that's how you update the database every time that you complete a mission. So let's go ahead and log out. And then I told you there's another way to do it where you only update the database once per session. We'll talk about that for a second. What in the world? Where is my studio code? Where? There we go. Okay. All right. So this is the same as on player loaded, but this is on player unload. And so what would happen is we would instead of triggering this server add XP, what we would do is we would just take, because we grabbed our table, we grabbed this XP table on player loaded, and it's only going to have 1 record in it, so it's only going to have 1 XP mod XP. And so all we would have to do is do xp mod xp equals xp mod xp plus xp add. And so how that would work is every time we sent over the add xp function, it would just add it to our table that's in the client, and it wouldn't affect the database at all. And so we would just be tracking our progress here. But whenever we do this check, instead of doing the callback, all we would do is say local current XP equals XP mod XP, right? And so we would say, we would still use that one. So let's uncomment that one and just tab it left. So that's how you would do it, and this wouldn't query the database every time that you do the mission. It would just check. It would just update this local table whenever you add XP, and you would check the local table here, and that's all you have to do, and you don't have to query the database every time. But to update the database for the next time they play, so they don't lose their experience, you would add this on player unload, and then you would trigger the dev training server add XP. Wait, that's not right. That's not right. It would be xp.mod xp. Yeah. So that will send over the latest value from our table that we've been updating here. And so that would do the same thing that we were doing every single time, where we were just adding the value of 1. This time it would add the value of the sum of all the missions that they have done while they were in the server. And yeah, you don't need that. That's unnecessary. So yeah, that's how you would do it locally, and just this would make it update only once per session. This is honestly the better way to do it, where you're not updating the database every time, because there's so many things that query the database in the server that anytime that you can keep a local table and just update the database once per session, that's going to be more efficient and less chance for bugs. So this is actually the proper way to do it this way. I could log in and show you everything again, but it's going to be the same difference. Just every time you complete a mission, it wouldn't update the database until you log out. That's it. Any questions? That's it for this lesson. It was a short one.